December 7th, 1944. A farmhouse 3 kilometers south of Simmerath, Germany, near the Belgian border. Unteroffizier Franz Gärtner pressed his face against the frost-covered window and watched American infantry advancing through the snow-covered field 200 meters distant. He'd fought on the Eastern Front for 2 years before his unit was pulled west to face the expected Allied push into the Fatherland. He knew combat. He'd survived Kursk, survived the retreat through Ukraine, survived situations where Soviet infantry outnumbered his squad 10-1. This felt different. His Karabiner, 98 Kurds, rested against the wall beside him. 5 rounds loaded into its internal magazine, stripper clips in his ammunition pouches. The rifle had served him faithfully since 1942, accurate to 500 meters, reliable in mud and snow, simple enough to field strip blindfolded. The bolt action mechanism required him to work the bolt up, back, forward, and down after each shot. 2 seconds if he moved quickly, 3 if he had to reacquire his target, 15 aimed shots per minute if everything went perfectly, 10 to 12 shots per minute under combat stress. The Americans weren't rushing forward in the disorganized waves he'd seen from Soviet conscripts in the East. These soldiers moved deliberately, each squad advancing in coordinated bounds. One group fired while another moved. The volume of incoming fire was continuous, rolling like summer thunder that never quite faded, not the sporadic crack of bolt-action rifles being cycled between shots. Something faster, much faster. Gärtner's squadmate, Gefreiter Hoffmann, crouched beside the opposite window. "How many are there?" Gärtner counted. "Maybe 20 Americans visible, perhaps a platoon." But the firepower sounded like double that number. The distinctive crack of 30-06 Springfield cartridges echoed across the frozen field in an almost seamless stream. Individual shots blurred together into sustained fire. "Intelligence said their rifle holds 8 rounds, Hoffmann muttered. "Semi-automatic. Fires as fast as you pull the trigger." Gärtner had heard the reports. He'd dismissed them as exaggeration. Soviet propaganda had claimed all manner of fictional capabilities during the Eastern Front campaigns. Why would American claims be different? But now, listening to the tempo of fire, watching how the Americans advanced without pausing to work rifle bolts, he understood. The intelligence reports had been accurate, perhaps even understated. An American rifleman rose from behind a low stone wall and fired 3 times in rapid succession. No bolt manipulation between shots, no break in his sight picture, 3 rounds, downrange in perhaps 2 seconds. Impossible with a bolt action. The Mauser system required breaking your position after each shot, operating the bolt, finding your target again. The German squad leader, Feldwebel Koch, moved through the farmhouse checking firing positions. "They'll reach the barn in 5 minutes if we don't slow them." He looked at Gärtner. "Pick your targets, make every shot count. We don't have ammunition to waste." Gärtner positioned himself at the window, rested his car, 98K, on the sill and sighted on an American soldier moving between covered positions. He estimated range at 180 meters. Easy shot. He controlled his breathing, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The 7.92mm round kicked against his shoulder. The American dropped. Gärtner immediately worked his bolt. Up, back, forward, down. Brass cartridge ejected, fresh round chambered. 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, multiple American rifles fired. He couldn't count the individual shots. 6, 8. The fire was too continuous to separate. He selected another target, an American advancing on the left. Fired. The soldier went down. Worked his bolt again. 2 more seconds. More American fire rolled across the field. Bullets struck the farmhouse walls. Wood splintered. Window glass shattered. The volume was overwhelming. What German infantrymen would learn over the winter of 1944 and 45 would reshape their understanding of infantry combat. The weapon that had dominated their thinking since 1935, the refined pinnacle of bolt-action rifle design, was suddenly obsolete. Not because it failed mechanically. The Kar 98K remained accurate, reliable, and effective, but it required 2 seconds between shots while the enemy fired continuously. For nearly 5 decades, bolt-action rifles had dominated military thinking across Europe. Since 1898, the Mauser system had represented the standard against which all infantry rifles were measured. The original Gewehr 98, refined into the Wehrmacht's Karabiner 98 Kurz in 1935, embodied everything German military doctrine valued in an infantry weapon. Accurate out to 500 meters in the hands of a trained marksman. Reliable in all conditions. Mud, snow, desert sand, Arctic cold. Simple enough for a conscript to master in basic training. The Kar-98K chambered the powerful 7.92 times 57mm Mauser cartridge. Muzzle velocity of 2,400 feet per second. Devastating terminal ballistics against personnel targets. The 5-round internal magazine fed smoothly using standard stripper clips that every German soldier carried in cloth bandoliers. A well-trained infantryman could deliver 10 to 15 aimed shots per minute, faster if he sacrificed accuracy for volume. This rate of fire had been sufficient for Wehrmacht tactical doctrine, which centered squad firepower around the MG-34 or MG-42 machine gun. The squad's structure reflected this philosophy. 10 men total, 1 non-commissioned officer as squad leader, 1 deputy squad leader, a 3-man machine gun team consisting of gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition carrier, 5 riflemen to provide security and covering fire for the gun team. The rifle was a supporting weapon. The machine gun killed. The rifleman provided security, suppressed enemy positions to allow the gun team to reposition, and protected the gunner from close assault. This doctrine had worked brilliantly through Poland, France, and the early campaigns in the Soviet Union. German tactical superiority allowed smaller forces to defeat larger enemies through superior fire discipline and coordinated maneuver. Then, beginning in North Africa in 1943 and continuing through Sicily and Italy, German forces began encountering something that didn't fit their tactical assumptions. The M1 Garand, adopted by the United States Army in 1936, represented a revolutionary departure from military orthodoxy that every other major power had rejected as impractical. Chambered in .30-06 Springfield, ballistically nearly identical to the German 7.92 Mauser round, the M1 was the world's first standard-issue semi-automatic infantry rifle fielded in massive numbers. Gas operated through a rotating bolt, the rifle fired every time the trigger was pulled until its 8-round en-bloc clip ran empty. No bolt manipulation required between shots. No breaking the sight picture. No wasted seconds finding the target again. The shooter stayed in the fight continuously, the gas-operated action automatically chambering the next round while maintaining aim. The statistics were stark. An M1-equipped American rifleman could deliver 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute, 3 to 4 times faster than a German with a Kar-98K. The practical combat rate under fire was closer to 30 rounds per minute. But even this represented a crushing advantage that German tactical doctrine had no answer for. What made this difference devastating wasn't just speed. It was sustained fire. A bolt-action rifleman had to break his sight, picture after every shot, work the action, reacquire the target. The semi-automatic Garand operator stayed on target continuously. The recoil cycle, absorbed by the gas system, the weight and balance of the rifle, promoting instinctive pointing. Most critically, staying on target through multiple shots, beat reacquiring the target. After working a bolt, German officers studying captured M1s in Tunisia were impressed by the weapon's quality. The machining tolerances were excellent. The gas system proved reliable, even in desert conditions that clogged and jammed more delicate mechanisms. Weight was 9.5 pounds loaded, comparable to the 9-pound Kar-98K. Effective range was listed at 500 yards, identical to German doctrine for infantry rifles, but integration into Wehrmacht tactics would have required a complete restructuring of infantry doctrine and logistics. The Kar-98K had already been manufactured in quantities exceeding 14 million rifles by 1944. Retooling production for a semi-automatic would have cost precious manufacturing capacity, better spent on machine guns, anti-tank weapons, and artillery that the Wehrmacht desperately needed. More critically, Germany's ammunition production capacity was strained. A semi-automatic rifle increased ammunition consumption per man by a factor of 3 to 5. German logistics, already stretched across 2,000 kilometers of front in the east and increasingly interdicted by Allied bombing in the west, couldn't support it. The industrial capacity to produce enough ammunition for semi-automatic rifles across the entire Wehrmacht simply didn't exist. The Germans did field the Gewehr 43 semi-automatic in limited numbers starting in 1943. Approximately 400,000 were produced by war's end, compared to over 5.4 million M1 Garands. But the G43 never became standard issue. Production numbers couldn't match demand. The average German infantryman carried a Kar 98K from 1939 to 1945. The disparity became clear in combat reports from every theatre. One German after-action report from Normandy in July 1944 noted that American rifle squads achieved continuous fire resembling light machine guns. Combined with their actual machine guns and overwhelming artillery support, American infantry achieved fire superiority with fewer men than German doctrine assumed necessary to hold comparable positions. The mathematics were brutal. An American infantry squad with 8 M1 Garands could theoretically deliver 320 rounds per minute of sustained semi-automatic fire before even considering their Browning automatic rifle or squad machine gun. A German squad with 8 Kar 98Ks delivered 80 to 120 rounds per minute of bolt-action fire. This 3-to-1 firepower advantage meant that, man for man, an American rifle squad outgunned a German rifle squad before support weapons entered the equation. For offensive operations, this was a significant advantage. For defensive operations against advancing Americans, it was catastrophic. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you're watching from today what German soldiers would experience in Normandy, the Ardennes, and across Germany itself would prove that General George S. Patton's assessment was accurate when he called the M1 the greatest battle implement ever devised. But in early 1944, most German soldiers still hadn't faced it in sustained combat. That was about to change. In February 1944, German intelligence summaries compiled from prisoner interrogations and captured equipment included assessments of American small arms. The reports were dismissive in tone, reflecting assumptions shaped by different tactical traditions and perhaps a degree of institutional arrogance born from 5 years of military victories. One intelligence summary described the M1 Garand as suitable for a wealthy nation that can afford to waste ammunition. Semi-automatic fire sacrifices the precision and range control necessary for proper military combat. The assessment reflected a worldview shaped by German marksmanship culture. German infantry training emphasized accurate fire at extended ranges. Disciplined volleys of controlled bolt-action fire represented proper infantry engagement. Semi-automatic fire seemed wasteful, undisciplined, the product of a nation with more industrial capacity than tactical sophistication. What German observers failed to grasp was that the Americans weren't sacrificing precision. The M1's gas-operated action absorbed recoil efficiently. The rifle's weight and balance promoted instinctive pointing, and, critically, staying on target through multiple shots beat reacquiring the target after working a bolt, even if individual shot placement was marginally less precise. The Americans were building their infantry tactics around a different philosophy than the German machine gun-centered squad. Suppression through volume of fire. Keep the enemy's head down with continuous rifle fire while maneuver elements advanced. The M1 made every rifleman a base of fire capable of sustained suppression. German doctrine still centered on the machine gun as the primary killing weapon. The riflemen existed to protect and support the MG team. This worked brilliantly when German forces held the initiative, when they could position their machine guns to enfilade advancing enemies, when defensive positions were established and fields of fire cleared. But by 1944, the Wehrmacht was increasingly fighting defensive battles against an enemy with industrial and material superiority. And in defense, the continuous semi-automatic fire of M1-equipped infantry suppressed German positions more effectively than bolt-action fire could answer. German soldiers couldn't move to better positions, couldn't maneuver, couldn't bring their tactical superiority and training advantage to bear when pinned down by sustained fire. Meanwhile, American production continued accelerating. Springfield Armory, and Winchester together manufactured 5.4 million M1 Garands between 1936 and 1945. Every American infantry division fielded 7,100 M1s. Every replacement battalion brought more. The stream never stopped. German soldiers began recognizing the distinctive ping sound when an M1's on-block clip ejected after the 8th round. Some learned to time attacks during those 2-second reloading intervals, but American tactics evolved to have squad members reload in sequence, maintaining continuous fire even when individual rifles emptied. The Americans don't shoot like soldiers, one German veteran of the Eastern Front wrote home in late 1943 after his unit redeployed to Italy. They shoot like they're emptying buckets of ammunition. We can't answer that volume of fire with our rifles. We hear 8 shots before we fired 3. The Wehrmacht was learning an uncomfortable lesson that would only intensify as Allied forces invaded France. Superior training and tactical doctrine couldn't overcome a 3-to-1 firepower disadvantage at the squad level. Not consistently. Not sustainably. And nowhere would this lesson be hammered home more violently than on the beaches of Normandy and in the hedgerows of France. June 6, 1944. 06:45 hours. Omaha Beach, Normandy. The first American troops to cross the seawall at Dog Green Sector carried M1 Garands slick with seawater and coated with sand. Half the men in the first wave were casualties before they reached the shingle cut down by interlocking fields of machine gun fire from concrete bunkers overlooking the beach. But the survivors who made it off the beach brought something German defenders in the WN-62 strongpoint had never faced in such concentrated numbers: sustained semi-automatic fire from infantry advancing under the heaviest artillery support the world had ever seen. Oberleutnant Bernhard Frerking commanded the concrete bunker complex overlooking the beach. His men had slaughtered Americans in the water with MG-42 fire. The machine guns rattled at 1,200 rounds per minute, tearing through landing craft and bodies with mechanical efficiency. The defenders had trained for this moment for 2 years. They knew their fields of fire, they knew the killing zones. For the first hour, the defense worked exactly as planned, but the Americans who reached cover didn't take defensive positions and wait for reinforcements. They advanced under fire with suppression that Frerking's veterans found unnerving. The volume of incoming rifle fire was constant, building as more troops crossed the beach and added their weapons to the fire plan. His grenadiers couldn't maneuver, couldn't reposition without drawing immediate fire. Every time a man moved, American rounds snapped past, not the occasional shot from a bolt-action rifleman finding his range. A storm of lead that never paused. An American rifle squad, 12 men with 10 M1 Garands and 1 Browning automatic rifle, was putting out sustained firepower that Frerking's 2 MG-42 positions could match, but not exceed. And the Americans had dozens of squads, each one a self-contained base of fire, advancing in coordinated bounds. The M1's 8-round capacity meant American soldiers fired, reloaded in seconds with a fresh clip, and continued firing in an almost seamless stream. German defenders, working Kar 98K bolts, managed 1 shot to every 3 incoming rounds. The mathematics of suppression worked decisively against them. Superior defensive positions and excellent fields of fire couldn't compensate when they couldn't return effective fire without exposing themselves to overwhelming volume. Private First Class Robert Sales, Company A, 116th Infantry Regiment, made it to the base of the bluff at 0730 hours. His M1 had functioned perfectly, despite full immersion in seawater during the landing. He'd fired 32 rounds, crossing 200 yards of beach, changing clips 4 times while moving. A German with a Kar 98K would have fired perhaps 8 rounds in the same time and distance, reloading once. Sales took position behind a destroyed beach obstacle. Above him, German positions continued firing. But the volume of American rifle fire was building to a crescendo as more troops crossed the beach. The defensive positions that had seemed impregnable at H hour were being suppressed by small arms fire alone, something German doctrine hadn't accounted for. The continuous crack of 30-06 rounds created psychological pressure beyond their physical danger. German soldiers described it in after-action reports and prisoner interrogations conducted in the weeks following the invasion. The sound never stopped, one captured grenadier told his interrogators. The Americans seemed to have unlimited ammunition. You wanted to keep your head down, but keeping your head down meant you couldn't fight back. When you did look to fire, the incoming volume increased immediately. At 08:15 hours, Sales's platoon began moving up the bluff. The advance was methodical, following training from countless exercises in England. 4 men fired, while 4 moved. Then the roles reversed, fire and movement. The M1 made this drill devastatingly effective. Every advancing rifleman could lay down suppressive fire without needing to cycle a bolt. Every stationary rifleman could engage targets continuously while his comrades moved. Fröking's bunker complex fell at 0940 hours. The Americans didn't overwhelm it with numbers. They smothered it with continuous fire until engineers could maneuver close enough to use satchel charges on the firing ports. The Kar 98 K-equipped grenadiers couldn't maintain fire volume sufficient to stop the crawling advance. When American soldiers were 60 meters away, sustained rifle fire made it impossible for defenders to expose themselves long enough to aim effectively. Similar actions repeated across Normandy through June and July. German veterans of the Eastern Front found the Western Front qualitatively different in ways their training and experience hadn't prepared them for. Soviet infantry had been numerous, often launching human wave attacks that absorbed horrific casualties. But Soviet rifles were primarily bolt-action Mosin-Nagants, with some SVT-40 semi-automatics issued in limited numbers. The firepower density was manageable. German machine guns and coordinated squad tactics could defeat Soviet attacks consistently. American infantry was different. Fewer men, but better armed, supported by overwhelming artillery and air power. Yes, but even at the small unit level, the firepower density was shocking. A German squad typically fielded 8 riflemen with Kar 98Ks and 1 2-man MG42 team. That represented perhaps 120 rounds per minute from the rifles plus 1,200 rounds per minute from the machine gun when ammunition supply permitted sustained fire. An American rifle squad fielded 8 men with M1 Garands, 2 men with M1 carbines, 1 man with a Browning automatic rifle, and 1 man with an M1903 Springfielder Scout. That was 320 rounds per minute from the Garands alone, 80 from the carbines, 600 from the bar in the assault role. Before the squad's machine gun entered the calculation, American small arms fire exceeded German rifle fire by a factor of 4. The Americans weren't better shots individually. German marksmanship training remained superior, emphasizing accuracy at range and fire discipline. But marksmanship mattered less when the Americans could put 3 bullets down range for every German one. Statistical probability favored volume. Someone would hit something. And the psychological impact of continuous incoming fire suppressed German tactical responses even when physical casualties remained moderate. By August 1944, German tactical manuals were being revised to address the firepower imbalance that was costing ground and lives across France. Recommendations included increased use of automatic weapons at the squad level, emphasis on immediate counterattack before Americans could establish fire superiority in newly captured positions, and avoidance of firefights at ranges under 300 meters, where American volume of fire overwhelmed German accuracy advantages. None of it worked consistently. The recommendations assumed resources that didn't exist. Automatic weapons required manufacturing capacity Germany no longer possessed. Immediate counterattacks required reserves that were committed elsewhere or destroyed in transit by Allied air power. Avoiding close-range engagements was tactically sound, but operationally impossible when defending fixed positions or urban terrain. The M1 Garand had tilted the tactical balance at the infantry squad level decisively toward the Americans. Not overwhelmingly, German tactical skill, defensive positions, and operational experience still mattered. But the margin was gone. The Wehrmacht could no longer count on superior performance from equivalent forces. The firepower advantage American infantry possessed meant that German forces needed numerical superiority or significant tactical advantages to achieve comparable results. Oberleutnant Frerking survived Omaha Beach. He was captured near Cherbourg on June 24th. During interrogation, Allied intelligence officers asked him about the most surprising aspect of combat with Americans. His answer entered the intelligence summary circulated to Allied units. Their rifle. Everyone shoots like a machine gun. We couldn't believe they were riflemen. We thought every American squad had multiple automatic weapons. It changes how you fight when the enemy never stops shooting. The comment reflected what German soldiers across Normandy were discovering. The tactical assumptions that had served them through 5 years of war no longer applied. The bolt-action rifle, refined to near perfection in the Kar 98K, was suddenly obsolete, not because it failed, but because the enemy had moved beyond that technology entirely. Technical analysis of M1 Garands captured throughout 1943 and 44 gave German ordnance experts a clear picture of why the weapon worked so effectively. The reports made uncomfortable reading for commanders still relying on Kar 98K-equipped infantry to hold against American advances. The M1's gas-operated system proved remarkably reliable under conditions that stopped more delicate mechanisms. A small port, 8 inches from the muzzle, bled off expanding gas as the bullet passed. This gas drove a piston that cycled the action, extracting the spent case, cocking the hammer, feeding a fresh round from the 8-round en-bloc clip. The cycle took 0.04 seconds. The shooter's finger was the limiting factor, not the mechanism. Recoil was manageable despite the powerful 30-06 cartridge. The M1's 9.5-pound weight and effective recoil spring meant the Springfield cartridge, generating 2,800 feet per second muzzle velocity, didn't punish the shooter excessively. Follow-up shots were faster and more accurate than with any bolt-action rifle in service with any army. The en-bloc clip system drew some criticism from German engineers examining captured rifles. The clip fed into the action from the top, making the rifle difficult to load while prone. The distinctive ping when the empty clip ejected revealed when a soldier needed to reload. But these were minor drawbacks compared to the sustained fire rate advantage. In practice, the reloading disadvantage was negligible. 2 seconds to insert a fresh clip. German soldiers working bolt actions spent comparable time reloading stripper clips into internal magazines. Range and accuracy matched the Kar 98K. The M1's peep sights were faster to acquire than the Kar 98K's notch and post, particularly in low light conditions. Maximum effective range was listed at 500 yards for both rifles. In practice, most infantry combat occurred inside 300 yards, where the M1's rapid fire mattered more than minute of angle precision at distance. Intelligence officers distributed bulletins throughout the Wehrmacht describing American tactics built around the M1's capabilities. American infantry doctrine emphasized achieving fire superiority at the squad level. Every rifleman was expected to pour fire into enemy positions to enable maneuver elements to advance. The M1 made this doctrine practical. The rifle's sustained fire capability allowed individual soldiers to suppress defensive positions that would require multiple riflemen with bolt actions to neutralize. The psychological impact exceeded the physical effect. German soldiers reported that continuous semi-automatic fire created stress disproportionate to actual casualties inflicted. The sound of constant incoming fire, even if most rounds missed, suppressed aggressive tactics and initiative. Men hesitated. Maneuver slowed. The instinct to keep your head down overrode tactical training when fire never paused long enough to allow movement. This was exactly the opposite effect of German MG-42 fire on Allied troops. The machine gun's cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute was terrifying, earning it the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw among American troops. But machine gun fire came from fixed positions that could be identified, avoided, or suppressed with concentrated fire. The M1's distributed firepower across the entire squad meant Americans could shoot at you from everywhere simultaneously. You couldn't identify the source. You couldn't maneuver around it. You couldn't suppress it effectively with limited return fire. By 1945, some German units equipped with captured M1 Garands preferred them to their own rifles, not because of better ballistics. The 30-06 and 7.92 Mauser were ballistically similar, not because of superior engineering. The Kar 98K was simpler and more reliable in the worst conditions, but because the psychological comfort of matching American firepower was worth the logistics headache of supplying 30-06 ammunition from captured stocks. Post-war assessments by military historians calculated that the M1 Garand increased American infantry effectiveness by approximately 25% compared to hypothetical bolt-action-equipped units in the same tactical situations. This figure didn't account for psychological factors or the tactical flexibility semi-automatic fire enabled. The true advantage was likely higher but impossible to quantify precisely. The British, who had rejected semi-automatic rifle development before the war as too complex and expensive, accelerated research on the M2 after observing the M1's effectiveness in Normandy. The Soviets, who had fielded the SVT-40 semi-automatic in limited numbers, regretted not making it standard issue. Every major military power studied the M1 as the template for future infantry rifles. What the Germans learned, too late to implement at scale, was that future infantry combat would be decided by sustained firepower at the squad level. The era of the bolt-action rifle as a primary military weapon ended in the hedgerows of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes. The M1 Garand wrote that epitaph in 8-round bursts of 30-06 fire. One captured German officer asked in 1945 which single American weapon caused the most concern among Wehrmacht infantry, gave an answer that would have seemed absurd in 1939. The rifle. They all have automatic rifles, not just some men in each squad, all of them. That's why we lost the small battles, and the small battles decide wars. The battle for Aachen in October 1944 demonstrated the M1's effectiveness in urban combat. The ancient German city, the first major German city the Allies attacked, was defended by veteran Wehrmacht and SS units determined to exact a high price for every block. Urban combat typically favored defenders with bolt-action rifles. Short engagement ranges, numerous firing positions, and limited fields of fire negated many advantages of semi-automatic weapons. But American infantry found that the M1's sustained fire capability remained decisive even in close-quarters urban fighting. When clearing buildings, room by room, the ability to fire multiple piercing shots without working a bolt meant American soldiers could engage multiple targets in rapid succession. When defending captured positions against counterattacks through rubble-strewn streets, continuous fire from multiple M1s created interlocking fields of fire that German bolt-action rifles couldn't match. Sergeant Robert Holmland, 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, described clearing a 4-story apartment building on October the 15th. "We went in with 8 men. Germans were on every floor. The first guy through the door fired 4 times in maybe 2 seconds, dropped 2 Germans before they could work their bolts once. We cleared that building in 10 minutes. If we'd had Springfields, half of us would have died doing it." German defenders in Aachen learned to avoid firefights with American infantry whenever possible. When counterattacking, they relied on machine guns, submachine guns, and grenades rather than rifle fire. The Kar 98K remained effective for sniping and long-range engagements, but at close range, the Americans' firepower advantage was overwhelming. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By December 1944, when Germany launched its last major offensive in the Ardennes forest, Wehrmacht infantry facing American defenders had developed deep respect for the M1 Garand. Intelligence briefings before the offensive warned that American infantry equipped with semi-automatic rifles would deliver firepower exceeding their numerical strength. Attack plans emphasized speed and surprise to prevent Americans from establishing defensive positions where their firepower advantage could be brought to bear. The offensive initially succeeded through surprise and overwhelming force against thinly held American positions. But as American reinforcements arrived and defensive lines stabilized, German infantry rediscovered the cost of attacking M1 equipped defenders at Bastogne, at St. Vith, along dozens of defensive perimeters established by surrounded American units. German attackers faced continuous fire from defenders who could shoot as fast as they could pull their triggers. Technical Sergeant James Hendricks, Company C, 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion, 4th Armored Division, defended a roadblock south of Bastogne on December the 22nd. His squad of 9 men held against repeated attacks by approximately 60 German infantry. "They came at us 3 times, Hendricks recalled. "Each time we just kept firing, didn't stop, didn't let up, they couldn't get close enough to use grenades. By the 3rd attack, they quit trying." The mathematics was simple. 9 M1 Garands could theoretically deliver 360 rounds per minute. 60 Germans with Kar 98Ks could deliver 720 rounds per minute, but only if they could establish firing positions and aim effectively. Under continuous suppressive fire from defenders who never stopped shooting, the attackers couldn't maintain aimed fire. Volume defeated tactics. The German semi-automatic rifle program, which had produced the Gewehr 43 in limited numbers, couldn't bridge the gap. Approximately 400,000 G43s were manufactured by war's end, compared to over 5 million M1 Garands. For every German soldier with a semi-automatic rifle, 13 Americans carried M1s. The disparity in practical terms meant that most German infantry faced American firepower superiority in virtually every engagement from mid-1944 onward. Production constraints weren't the only limitation. German logistics couldn't support widespread semi-automatic rifle use, even if production capacity existed. Ammunition consumption with semi-automatic rifles increased 3 to 5 times compared to bolt actions. German ammunition production, already strained by competing demands from machine guns, artillery, and anti-aircraft weapons, couldn't sustain that increase across the entire Wehrmacht. By February 1945, as Allied forces pushed into Germany itself, Wehrmacht resistance increasingly relied on defensive positions, anti-tank weapons, and machine guns rather than infantry rifle fire. German tactical doctrine had fully adapted to the reality that infantry armed primarily with bolt-action rifles couldn't win firefights against M1 equipped Americans. The goal became avoiding rifle range engagements entirely, relying instead on machine guns for sustained fire and positioning to force Americans into killing zones covered by multiple automatic weapons. This defensive approach sometimes succeeded in slowing American advances and inflicting casualties, but it was fundamentally reactive. Initiative belonged to the side that could establish fire superiority and maneuver freely. American infantry with M1 Garands possessed that capability. German infantry with Kar 98Ks did not. The M1 Garand served as America's standard infantry rifle from 1936 to 1957. Over 5.4 million were manufactured by Springfield Armory and Winchester. The rifle saw combat in World War II, Korea, and limited service in early Vietnam before the M14 replaced it. But its impact on military history extended far beyond its service life. Combat effectiveness statistics from World War II painted a clear picture of the advantage semi-automatic rifles provided. American infantry units consistently achieved fire superiority against equivalent-sized German forces. When variables like artillery support, air power, and tactical position were controlled for, M1 equipped Americans delivered approximately 2.5 to 3 times more small arms fire per minute than TAR 98 equipped Germans. This firepower advantage translated into measurably lower American casualties in offensive operations. Studies conducted by the United States Army's Operations Research Office in the 1950s estimated that semi-automatic rifles reduced casualties by 15 to 20% in assault operations compared to bolt actions. The reduction came primarily from suppressing defensive fire more effectively, preventing defenders from delivering aimed shots while attackers advanced. The weapon's reliability record was exceptional. Fewer than 1% of M1 Garands issued experienced catastrophic failures, requiring armorer-level repair. The rifle functioned in desert heat in North Africa, Arctic cold in the Ardennes winter, Pacific humidity in the Solomon Islands and Philippines, and European mud throughout the Italian and Northwest European campaigns. Soldiers reported that basic field maintenance, cleaning and lubrication with materials available in any infantry unit, kept the weapon operational under conditions that disabled more complex designs. General George S. Patton's famous assessment that the M1 was the greatest battle implement ever devised appeared in a letter to Springfield Armory, dated January 26, 1945. While hyperbolic in the way Patton's pronouncements often were, his judgment reflected operational reality. The M1 gave American infantry a tangible advantage that no amount of German tactical skill could fully overcome. Superior training, better defensive positions, and more combat experience mattered. But they mattered less when the enemy could fire 3 times faster. Post-war military doctrine across NATO and Warsaw Pact nations embraced semi-automatic and select-fire rifles as standard. The British EM2, the Soviet AK-47, the Belgian FAL, the German G3, all traced their doctrinal lineage to the M1's demonstrated effectiveness. The bolt-action rifle survived only as a specialized weapon for snipers and ceremonial units. The age of the bolt-action as the primary infantry weapon ended permanently. The Korean War validated the M1's design in a new theater with different tactical challenges. In bitter cold that froze weapons and killed batteries, in rapid close quarters, fighting against Chinese human wave attacks, the M1's semi-automatic fire proved decisive. American troops could deliver continuous fire into mass assaults in ways that bolt-action rifles couldn't sustain. Private First Class William Thompson, Company M, 24th Infantry Regiment, 25th Infantry Division, defended a position near Haimen in August 1950 against a Chinese night attack. His squad of 12 men held against approximately 300 attackers. They came in waves, Thompson recalled years later. "We just fired. Keep shooting. Don't stop." The Garands kept working. We went through every clip we had. If we'd had bolt actions, they would have overrun us in the first 5 minutes. The mathematics of sustained fire became even more critical against human wave attacks than in conventional engagements. Chinese tactics relied on overwhelming defensive positions through sheer numbers before defenders could inflict sufficient casualties to stop the assault. Against bolt-action rifles, this often worked. Against M1 Garands, delivering 3 times the fire rate, the casualties required to reach defensive positions became prohibitive. Technical Sergeant Hiroshi Miyamura, Company H, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, earned the Medal of Honor on April the 24th and 25th, 1951, defending a position near Taizhongni against repeated Chinese attacks. Armed with his M1 Garand, Miyamura killed more than 50 enemy soldiers during the engagement. The citation specifically noted his effective use of rifle fire to break up attack formations before they could close to grenade range. The sustained fire capability that proved so effective against German infantry in Europe worked equally well against Chinese infantry in Korea. The tactical situation differed: night attacks instead of daylight advances, mass formations instead of dispersed squads, but the fundamental advantage remained identical. Semi-automatic fire delivered volume that bolt-action rifles couldn't match. Several nations adopted the M1 post-war through military aid programs or direct purchase. Italy manufactured licensed copies designated the Modello 1952. Denmark, Norway, Greece, and Turkey received M1s through NATO military assistance. The rifle's reputation attracted customers beyond the original American infantry. Nations that had observed its effectiveness in combat wanted the same advantage for their own forces. By 1960, the M1's fundamental design, a gas-operated semi-automatic rifle, a full-power rifle cartridge, was considered obsolete. Intermediate cartridges like the Soviet 7.62 times 39 and developments in select fire capability had moved beyond the M1's design parameters. The M14, essentially an M1 modified for 7.62 mm NATO with a 20-round magazine and select fire capability, replaced it in American service. But the M1's legacy persisted in ways more fundamental than direct descendants. Modern military rifle design traces a direct line from the Garand gas-operated rotating bolt system. The M16, the AK-47, and their countless descendants all employ variations of operating principles John Garand pioneered in the 1920s and 30s. More fundamentally, the M1 established the modern concept of infantry firepower. Every rifleman a source of continuous suppressive fire, every squad a self-contained fire base, every unit built around sustained shooting rather than massed volleys. The Germans learned this lesson by receiving it on battlefields from Tunisia to Berlin. By the time they learned it, implementation came too late to matter. The story of the M1 Garand reveals a fundamental truth about military innovation that extends beyond any single weapon. Tactical assumptions die harder than the soldiers holding outdated weapons. German military theorists correctly identified that their MG-42-centered squad doctrine was superior to American rifle-centered tactics if both sides used bolt-action rifles. The analysis was accurate. The flaw was solving yesterday's problem. The M1 Garand changed the equation completely. Suddenly, American squads didn't need to wait for machine gun support to establish fire superiority. Every rifleman contributed continuous suppression. The distribution of firepower across the entire squad made American infantry more flexible, more resilient to casualties, and more capable of independent action than German doctrine anticipated. The Wehrmacht's response revealed the institutional inflexibility that contributed to its ultimate defeat. Unable to retool for semi-automatic production without sacrificing other manufacturing priorities, unwilling to restructure squad tactics around principles that contradicted decades of doctrine, German forces fought 1944 and 1945 with 1939's weapons and 1918's tactical thinking. The results were predictable. Technology alone doesn't win wars. The Soviet Union proved that industrial capacity and manpower could overcome technological disadvantages through sheer scale. But the right technology in sufficient quantities, wielded by adequately trained soldiers, shifts the odds decisively. The M1 Garand was the right technology. The Americans had millions of them, and their soldiers learned quickly to exploit the advantage. One en-bloc clip at a time, one 8-round burst of semi-automatic fire at a time. The farmer's rifle that German intelligence dismissed in North Africa proved Patton's assessment accurate, not because it was the perfect weapon, no weapon is perfect, but because it gave the average American infantryman a concrete advantage that changed how small unit combat was fought. The firepower mathematics were undeniable. In the 2 minutes it took a German soldier to fire 30 rounds from his Kar 98K, working his bolts 6 times between each 5-round reload, an American with an M1 Garand could fire 80 to 100 rounds, pausing only to insert fresh clips every 8 shots. The German would reload his internal magazine 6 times using stripper clips, breaking his firing position repeatedly. The American would reload 10 to 12 times, each reload taking 2 seconds with minimal disruption to his sight picture. The title's reference to 96 aim shots captures this disparity with some license, but the underlying reality was accurate. In any sustained firefight, lasting more than a minute, American riflemen could put 3 times more lead downrange than their German counterparts. Volume didn't guarantee accuracy, but it created suppression. And suppression won firefights by preventing the enemy from shooting back effectively. German veterans interviewed after the war consistently cited American firepower as the most significant tactical challenge they faced. Not American tanks, though the Sherman outclassed most German armor in reliability and numbers. Not American artillery, though the volume and accuracy exceeded German capabilities. Not American air power, though it dominated the skies from mid-1944 onward. The rifle, the basic infantry weapon that every soldier carried. That was what German soldiers remembered. The continuous crack of 30-06 fire that never stopped. The inability to move without drawing immediate fire. The mathematical impossibility of winning firefights when outnumbered and outgunned at the individual soldier level. Obergefreiter Heinrich Severloh, who defended Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, fired more than 12,000 rounds from his MG-42 during the battle. He survived the war and decades later provided detailed accounts of that day. When asked what surprised him most about fighting Americans, his answer echoed what countless other German soldiers reported. The rifle fire. We expected machine guns. We were prepared for machine guns, but the rifle fire was continuous, like machine guns, but from everywhere. Every American seemed to have an automatic weapon. We couldn't understand how they sustained that volume of fire. Later, we learned their rifles were semi-automatic. It made sense then, but during the battle it was overwhelming. The psychological impact of continuous fire exceeded its physical effect in ways difficult to quantify, but universally reported. German soldiers described the sound creating stress that affected decision-making and suppressed initiative. The instinct to avoid exposure, reinforced by constant incoming fire, slowed reactions and prevented aggressive tactics. Even veteran troops with years of combat experience found the volume of American rifle fire psychologically wearing. This wasn't cowardice or poor training. German infantry throughout World War II demonstrated courage and skill consistently. But courage and skill operate within human limitations. Continuous incoming fire triggers survival instincts that training can moderate but not eliminate. The Americans were exploiting a basic feature of human psychology. People under fire seek cover and stay in cover until the fire stops or other factors force movement. With bolt-action rifles, fire naturally paused as shooters worked their actions. Those pauses, lasting only seconds, provided opportunities for movement and response. With semi-automatic rifles, the pauses disappeared. Fire became continuous. Opportunities to move vanished. The tactical tempo shifted decisively toward the side, maintaining continuous fire. American tactical manuals from 1944 emphasized this principle explicitly. The purpose of rifle fire is not primarily to kill the enemy, though kills are desirable. The purpose is to suppress enemy positions and enable maneuver. A pinned enemy cannot shoot effectively, cannot maneuver, and cannot interfere with your movement. Pin them with fire, maneuver to better positions, close with them before they can respond. The doctrine worked because the M1 made it practical. Every rifleman could pin enemy positions through sustained fire. Squads could advance using fire and movement without requiring machine gun support for every bound. Platoons achieved fire superiority through rifles alone, saving machine gun fire for harder targets. German tactical manuals had no effective counter. Recommendations to avoid close-range engagements and emphasize machine gun fire were theoretically sound, but practically impossible when defending fixed positions or urban terrain. The Americans chose when and where to engage. German defenders reacted to American initiative. The side with firepower superiority dictated the tactical tempo. By March 1945, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and drove into Germany's heartland, Wehrmacht resistance increasingly relied on hastily conscripted Volkssturm militia armed with whatever weapons remained available. Many received Kar-98Ks from storage. Some received captured Soviet rifles. Others received obsolete weapons dating to World War I. None received M1 Garands, though captured American weapons were prized and used when ammunition could be obtained. The contrast between equipment levels reached its peak during the final months. American infantry advancing into Germany carried M1 Garands, had access to unlimited ammunition resupply, and operated with overwhelming artillery and air support. German defenders, many of them teenagers or men in their 50s, carried bolt-action rifles with limited ammunition and virtually no supporting fires. The outcome was foreordained. The weapon that had given American infantry a 3-to-1 firepower advantage against veteran Wehrmacht troops in Normandy gave them an overwhelming advantage against poorly trained militia defenders in Germany. Firefights that might have lasted hours with evenly matched forces ended in minutes when one side fired 3 times faster than the other. Private First Class Harold Schreier, who raised the American flag on Iwo Jima in one of World War II's most iconic photographs, carried an M1 Garand throughout the Pacific campaign. In post-war interviews, he credited the rifle with saving his life repeatedly. "You didn't think about it most of the time," he said. "You just shot. But when you saw Japanese soldiers with bolt actions, you knew you had an advantage. You could get off 3 shots before they could fire twice. In close combat, that difference was life or death." The mathematics were identical in the Pacific as in Europe. Japanese infantry armed with Type 38 or Type 99 Arisaka bolt-action rifles faced the same firepower disadvantage that German infantry faced. Japanese tactics emphasized surprise, close combat, and willingness to accept casualties. Against bolt-action rifles, these tactics sometimes succeeded. Against M1 Garands, they resulted in catastrophic Japanese casualties. The Battle of Tarawa in November 1943 demonstrated this dynamic brutally. Japanese defenders entrenched in prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire should have inflicted prohibitive casualties on attacking Marines. They did inflict heavy casualties, more than 3,000 American casualties in 76 hours of combat. But Japanese casualties exceeded 4,700, killed out of 4,800 defenders. The exchange ratio favored Americans, despite attacking fortified positions. Marine rifle fire contributed significantly to that ratio. Continuous semi-automatic fire suppressed Japanese defensive positions long enough for assault teams to close and destroy bunkers with flamethrowers and demolitions. Japanese defenders armed with bolt-action rifles couldn't maintain effective fire under the volume of incoming 30-06 rounds. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.